My family gave me only $7K, while they spent $500K on my siblings. Years later, they went bankrupt and got abandoned. Now they're begging me for help, but I showed them the numbers they never expected to see. I'm 27 years old. I work in construction and interior design, and honestly, I need to tell this story because it's been eating away at me for years. And what happened a few months ago basically closed a chapter that I never thought would end this way. The thing is, I grew up in a family that from the outside looked normal. You know, mom, dad, 3 siblings and me, house in the suburbs, Sunday family dinners, all that stuff. But inside there was something that was always wrong, and it took me years to figure out what exactly it was, or rather, it took me years to admit it to myself, because it's one of those things that when you're a kid, you can't process well. You know what I mean? I'm the second of 4 kids. There's Amanda, my older sister, who's like 32 now, then me, then Brandon, who's 24, and Rachel, the youngest, at 22. We grew up in a house where my parents always said they loved us all equally, that there were no favorites, that they would do anything for their kids. And I believed to them for a long time, like until I was about 23 or 24, and I started doing mental math on certain things that didn't add up. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up a bit so you understand how the process was. When Amanda graduated high school, she got into an Ivy League university. I don't remember if it was Yale or Columbia, one of those. My parents were super proud, obviously, and paid the entire tuition without hesitation. We're talking about like $60,000 a year for 4 years, so almost $250,000 just on her education. At that time, I was like 13 and didn't pay much attention to it because, well, she was my older sister and I was a teenager who only thought about video games and soccer. When Amanda got married at 26, my parents gave her $200,000 for the wedding. $200,000. I remember that perfectly because my mom wouldn't stop talking about the details, about the venue that cost a fortune, about the dress that was imported, about the flowers that came from who knows where. It was a dream wedding, literally, like something out of a magazine. Meanwhile, I was finishing high school and told them I wanted to study architecture or design, something related to construction because I'd always liked working with my hands and creating things. My dad told me that college was very expensive and that if I wanted to study, I should get scholarships or student loans, because they couldn't afford another expensive tuition after Amanda's. I understood. I mean, I thought it made sense at the time. So I worked for 2 years after graduating, saving every penny, and eventually got into a technical school for interior design and construction, which cost like 1/10 of what they'd paid for Amanda. I took out a student loan anyway because it wasn't enough, and my parents helped me with $7,000 to buy tools and equipment. $7,000. I remember it because I signed a paper saying it was a gift and not a loan. Then came Brandon. He did go to college, a state school, but still, it cost something, and my parents paid for everything completely, plus his apartment rent for 4 years, plus they gave him money to do a master's degree afterwards. When I asked my mom why they could do it with Brandon and not with me, she said something like they had improved their financial situation, and besides, I had chosen a shorter and cheaper career. It made some sense, I guess, but I was already getting curious about why it always seemed like I was the exception. Rachel, the youngest, took out student loans for college because my parents said they couldn't keep paying for complete degrees anymore. But turns out when she graduated like 2 years ago, my parents paid off all her loans in one lump sum. We're talking about like $80,000. They paid them without thinking twice. By that point, I'd been paying mine for years, which were much smaller but still weighed on me. And when I mentioned to my dad that it would be amazing if they could help me even with a part of it, he told me I was already an independent adult, and I had to learn to manage my own finances. I'd been collecting all this information over the years, but I'd never put it in complete perspective until a family dinner like 8 months ago. It was a normal Sunday. We were all at my parents' house for the weekly dinner, and the conversation turned to finances because Amanda was talking about how she and her husband were thinking of buying a second property. Brandon mentioned he was considering a doctorate and would probably ask my parents to help him again with tuition because his was very expensive. Rachel talked about how it had been such a huge relief that they paid off her loans because that way she could save for a new car. And I was sitting there, eating the chicken my mom had brought, and suddenly it all hit me at once, like an avalanche. I did quick mental calculations while they kept talking. Amanda, 240,000 in college, 200,000 in wedding, not counting all the extra money they'd given her over the years for rent, cars, vacations. Brandon, like 100,000 in college, plus the masters, which was another 60,000, plus 4 years of rent, which I estimate was another 40,000 easily. Rachel, 80,000 in loans paid off, plus everything they paid for her rent while she was studying. Me, $7,000 in tools and equipment. 7,000 versus over $500,000 distributed among my siblings. And it's not that I was keeping score to be envious or resentful, but when you see it like that, all together, it's impossible not to feel like something is very wrong. I didn't say anything in that moment because, honestly, I didn't know how to express it without sounding bitter. But throughout the whole dinner, I couldn't stop thinking about it. About how I had worked 2 jobs for years to pay for my studies. How I was still paying my student loan. How I'd had to live in a crappy apartment with 2 roommates until just a year ago because I couldn't afford anything better, while my siblings had basically had everything handed to them. And the worst part is, they didn't even seem to realize how unequal everything had been. They talked about my parents' generosity as if it were something we'd all received equally, as if I'd also had access to that family bank that apparently was only available to some. Things got worse. Like 2 weeks later at another family dinner, I think it was Brandon's birthday or something. We were all at my parents' house again, and the conversation went back to money topics because Rachel was saying she wanted to take a trip to Europe, and my parents had offered to pay for her plane tickets as an early birthday gift. And I was fed up already, honestly. So I said something like, "Lucky you, Rachel, they never paid for even a bus ticket for me." I said it half-jokingly, but with that tone that makes it clear it's not a joke at all, you know? There was an uncomfortable silence, and my mom said something like, "Oh, Jason, don't start. We've all received help in different ways." And that's when I exploded. I didn't yell or anything dramatic, but I did raise my voice and told them, "Really, Mom? Different ways?" Amanda received over $400,000 between her college and her wedding. Brandon is probably around $200,000 with everything you've paid for him. Rachel is already at least $100,000. And I received $7,000 almost 10 years ago. 7,000. That's not help in different ways. That's basically ignoring me while you 3 got everything handed to you on a silver platter. My dad turned red. That face he makes when he's about to explode. And told me that I had chosen a different path, that I had opted for a technical career instead of traditional college, that I had decided to be more independent. And I responded, "Decided? Do you really think I decided to work 2 jobs while studying because I liked it? You told me you couldn't pay for my college, period. You didn't give me a choice. With Amanda, there was no conversation about, it's too expensive. You just paid whatever was necessary. Same with Brandon. With me, the story was different from the start, and we all know it. Amanda tried to calm things down, saying that each situation had been different, that they'd had better financial moments when it was their turn, that I shouldn't compare. And that threw me off even more because, how am I not going to compare? We're siblings, we grew up in the same house with the same parents, but I was treated like I was second class my whole life. Brandon was quiet looking at his plate, and Rachel looked uncomfortable, but neither of them defended me, which already told me everything I needed to know about how aware they were of their privilege. I told them it was obvious I'd never been a priority for them, that I'd always been the son they could ignore because he manages on his own, while they solved life for the other 3 constantly. My mom started crying, which made me feel guilty for a second, but then I thought, why should I feel guilty for telling the truth? I told them, "You created this situation, not me. You decided that some of your children deserved all your support and others just crumbs. It's not my fault. It hurts to hear it, now that someone finally says it out loud." I got up from the table, grabbed my things, and left the house without saying goodbye. I drove to a park nearby and sat on a bench for like 2 hours, just processing everything because I felt like my chest was going to explode. I wasn't crying or anything, but I was shaking from the rage and accumulated frustration of years. My whole life, I'd felt something wasn't right, that there was a difference in how they treated me versus my siblings, but I'd always minimized it. I thought it was my imagination, or that I was too sensitive. But no, numbers don't lie. The difference was real. Massive. And nobody but me seemed to have a problem with it. During the following days, I was obsessed with the idea of proving my point in a way they couldn't deny or minimize. I started gathering all the information I could find: old emails, text messages where my parents mentioned payments or financial help, receipts I'd kept for years. I even called Amanda and asked her specific numbers, acting casual, like wanting to know details about her wedding because I was thinking about the future. She told me everything without any problem because she had no idea what I was planning. I did the same with Brandon, asked him about his master's and his rents, and he gave me all the information thinking I was just considering doing a master's too. I spent like a week putting all this together. Literally, I'd come home from work and sit down to organize documents and do calculations. I made a presentation. Yes, a presentation with slides and everything, dividing expenses by child, comparing amounts, putting the numbers in charts, so it would be impossible not to see the disparity. I had one slide showing that Amanda had received approximately $450,000 in total, Brandon about $230,000, Rachel close to $130,000, and me my miserable $7,000. Another slide showed the percentage of support each one had received. It was brutal to see it like that, in numbers and colors. Rachel's birthday was like 3 weeks after the disastrous dinner, and I knew there was going to be another family gathering. My parents had sent me messages asking me to come, saying we needed to talk, that I had misinterpreted things. I didn't respond much to them, just said, yes, I was going to go. I brought my laptop with the presentation saved. Honestly, I was nervous, but also determined. I needed them to see this, to process it in a way they couldn't deflect or change the subject. I arrived at the house and everyone acted kind of uncomfortable at first, like when there's tension in the air, but nobody wants to be the first to mention it. We ate dinner, sang happy birthday, Rachel opened gifts, and when we were already at the dessert moment, I said I had something to share with the family. My mom said something like, "Jason, please not now. It's your sister's birthday." But I was already taking out the laptop and connecting it to their TV. I told them it wasn't going to take long, and that I really needed them to see this. I started going through the slides. My siblings looked at each other confused at first, then Amanda's face changed to something like understanding mixed with guilt. Brandon was pale. Rachel didn't know where to hide. My parents tried to interrupt me several times, but I kept going forward, showing each number, each comparison, each graph that proved the point I'd been trying to make. I told them, these are the facts, not opinions, not interpretations. These are the real numbers of how much you've invested in each of your children. The difference isn't small. It's not justifiable by timing or circumstances. It's massive, and it's intentional. When I finished, nobody knew what to say. Amanda was the first to speak, said something like she'd never thought about it that way, that she assumed we'd all received similar help, and that now she felt terrible for not noticing. Brandon admitted that yes, he knew they'd given him a lot, but he thought it was normal, that that's how it was in all families. Rachel was crying, saying she was so sorry, that she hadn't asked them to pay off her loans, but she hadn't refused the help either. My mom tried to justify herself, saying that with me it had been different because I was more independent since I was young, that it seemed like I didn't need as much help. And I told her, so, because I didn't ask for help constantly, you decided I didn't deserve it? That's your logic? Because Brandon asked for everything, you gave it to him, but since I tried to manage on my own, then you decided it was okay to leave me with nothing. That's not being fair. That's punishing me for being responsible. My dad got up from the table and told me, listen, Jason, I understand you're upset, but you have to understand that we did the best we could with what we had at each moment. And I answered him, no, Dad, you didn't do the best you could. You did the minimum with me and the maximum with them. There's a difference. If you really had wanted to be fair, you would have distributed things equitably, or at least tried to compensate later when your situation improved. But you never did because, honestly, I think I never mattered to you, the same way they did. That set him off. He yelled at me that I was ungrateful, that I should be happy with what I'd received instead of comparing myself to my siblings, that each family works differently. And if I didn't like how they had handled things, then I could leave and not come back. And I told him, you know what? You're right. I'm leaving. I packed up my laptop, grabbed my jacket, and left that house thinking I probably wouldn't come back. And honestly, I didn't feel sad. I felt liberated in some strange way. During the following months, I focused completely on my work and my life. I blocked my parents on all social media, didn't answer their calls or messages, basically cut off all contact. My siblings wrote to me from time to time, mainly Amanda and Rachel, asking to talk, to fix things. But I wasn't ready. Brandon kind of disappeared too. I don't know if he felt so guilty he didn't even want to try to contact me. My life was suddenly much calmer without all that toxic family dynamic, without the constant comparisons, without feeling like I was always the least important. I focused on growing my design and construction business. I'd started my own company like 2 years before, small, just me and a helper, but I started getting more clients, better projects. I worked like 12 hours a day sometimes, but I loved what I did, and for the first time in my life I felt like I was building something that was completely mine, without depending on anyone, without having to ask for help or justify my decisions. It was exhausting, but satisfying in a way I'd never experienced before. Like 2 years passed, almost 3 now that I think about it. My business grew quite a bit. I hired 5 employees. We moved to a real office instead of working from my apartment. We started doing commercial projects in addition to residential. I was doing well financially, not rich, but comfortable, with savings and no debt because I'd finally finished paying my student loans. I bought my own apartment, nothing fancy but mine, and for the first time I felt like I'd achieved real stability without anyone's help. I didn't know much about my family during that time. Amanda wrote to me like 3 times during the first year, then stopped trying. Rachel sent me a message at Christmas each year, but I only responded with a thanks, same, and nothing more. I didn't hear anything at all from Brandon, which seemed fine to me. My parents tried to contact me several times the first few months, then stopped. Honestly, I thought that was the end of that story, that we'd simply each go our own way, and eventually it would be as if we didn't exist to each other. But like 4 months ago, I got a call from my mom. I didn't answer the first 3 times because it took me by surprise to see her name after so long. The 4th time I did answer. I don't know why. I think curiosity got the better of me. Her voice sounded different, like older, more tired. She told me they needed to talk to me, that it was important, that please, could I give them the chance to meet, even just once. I asked her about what, and she said she preferred to talk in person, if I could meet them at a cafe or wherever I wanted. I hesitated a lot about whether to go or not. I spent several days thinking about it, talked to a close friend who knew the whole story, and he told me that maybe they just wanted to close things on good terms, that I had nothing to lose by going to listen. So I accepted. We agreed to meet at a cafe near my office. Neutral, public, where I'd feel comfortable and could leave whenever I wanted. I arrived at the cafe like 10 minutes late intentionally. I didn't want to seem eager. My parents were already there, sitting at a table in the back, and when I saw them, I was shocked by how different they looked. My dad had aged tremendously, like 10 years had passed instead of 3, with completely white hair and a thinner face. My mom looked tired, with dark circles, more wrinkled. I sat down without saying much more than a polite hello and waited for them to speak first. My mom started by telling me they'd been thinking a lot about what had happened, about the presentation I'd shown them, about all the things I'd said to them. She told me that after I left, they'd had long conversations with my siblings, that everyone had realized they'd been unfair to me, that Amanda, Brandon, and Rachel had made them see things they hadn't wanted to acknowledge before. She said my siblings basically confronted them too, each one separately, asking them why they'd treated me differently, why they'd allowed that inequality to exist without doing anything to correct it. My dad added something that left me frozen. He told me that all 3, Amanda, Brandon, and Rachel, had cut off contact with them like a year and a half ago. That Rachel was the first, telling them she couldn't continue having a relationship with them, knowing they'd been so unfair to me, and that when she tried to defend me after that presentation, they had ignored her. Then Brandon did the same. Apparently, he sent them a long email explaining that he always knew he'd received more, but never imagined the difference was so big, and that he felt complicit in that unfair treatment. Amanda was the last, like 6 months after Rachel, telling them she couldn't respect parents who treated their children so unequally. My parents were basically alone now, without any of their 4 children, My mom was crying as she told me all this, saying they'd lost everyone, that the family had disintegrated, that they'd realized too late what they'd done. My dad looked devastated, without that pride that had always characterized him, just empty. They told me they'd tried to reconcile with my siblings, but none of them wanted anything to do with them. That Rachel had told them that if they wanted to get anyone back, they should start with me because I was the most affected, and the one who had the most right to be angry. My dad told me they had financial problems too. He didn't go into many details, but mentioned something about investments that went wrong, that they'd had to sell the big house and move to a smaller apartment, that things were difficult. And then came what really bothered me. My mom asked me if I could help them. Not with much, just something so they could stabilize a bit. She showed me some papers with debts and medical expenses. Apparently my dad had had some health problems that they didn't have good insurance to cover. I sat there processing all this. On one hand, there was a part of me that felt something like satisfaction, like that feeling that finally there was some justice in the universe, that they were experiencing the consequences of their actions. But there was also another part, smaller but present, that felt pity, because at the end of the day they were my parents, older people who were suffering and who had finally acknowledged they were wrong. I asked them directly, "Why me? Why did you treat me differently my whole life?" My mom tried to explain something about how I'd always been more independent, that it seemed like I didn't need as much, that with the others it had been more obvious they required help. But I told her, "That's not reason enough. That doesn't justify anything. You decided that because I didn't constantly ask for help, I didn't deserve it. You punished me for being responsible and self-sufficient. And now that all the children who did ask you for help abandoned you, you come to me expecting me to be available to rescue you." My dad told me he understood if I was angry, that I had a right to be, but that he hoped we could start over, that he and my mom had changed, that they really regretted it. I answered him that regret after 3 years of silence. And only when they're desperate doesn't count for much. If they'd really regretted it, they would have tried to compensate for things when they were still doing well, when they didn't need anything from me. But they didn't. Only now that their other perfect children left them is when they remember they had a fourth child who existed. They asked me what they could do to fix things. I told them honestly that I didn't know if there was anything to fix, that too much time had passed, that too much damage had been done. I explained to them that I'd built a life without them, that I'd done well precisely because I stopped expecting anything from a family that never saw me as equal. My mom kept crying, saying she was so sorry, that she would do anything to get me back. But I was thinking, where were those tears when I left the house 3 years ago? Where was that regret when I presented all the evidence of their favoritism? I told them that about the financial help they were asking for. I had to think about it. That I wasn't going to give them an answer right there. My dad rushed to say that anything would help, that they weren't asking for much, just something to get out of the hole they were in. And that bothered me more because it was exactly the attitude I'd received my whole life. We're not asking for much. As if the crumb they gave me at some point was enough. Now they were in a position to ask for crumbs, and they didn't even see the irony. We ended that meeting without resolving anything. I told them I'd contact them when I'd thought things through, not to expect an answer soon. I left the cafe feeling strange, a mix of emotions I didn't know how to process. I drove to my apartment thinking about everything that had happened, about how the tables had completely turned, about how life has curious ways of balancing things out. It's been like 2 months since that meeting. My parents have written to me several times. Not much, just short messages asking how I am. If I've thought about what we talked about, I respond basically, neutrally, without committing to anything. The truth is, I still don't know what to do. Part of me feels like I should help them even a little, because they're my parents, and they're in a difficult situation, and I now have the means to do it. But another part, the part that spent years feeling less than its siblings, that worked twice as hard to get half as much, that part tells me I don't owe them anything, that they had every opportunity in the world to be better parents to me, and chose not to be. The ironic thing is that Amanda, Brandon, and Rachel, the 3 who received all that support, were the ones who finally stood up for what was right and cut ties with my parents when they realized how unfair the situation was. I thought they'd never see the problem, that they'd always be blind to their privilege, But it turned out that when I put the numbers in front of their faces, something clicked. I haven't talked to them since then either. I don't know if I ever will, but there's something strangely comforting in knowing that in the end, they understood. That I wasn't crazy for feeling that things had been wrong my whole life. My business keeps growing. We just signed a contract to remodel an entire office building, the biggest project we've had. I'm thinking about hiring 3 more people next month. Things are good in my life. Better than I ever imagined when I was working 2 jobs to pay for a technical school, while my siblings enjoyed paid universities and dream weddings. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if my parents had supported me, even half as much as they supported the others. Would I have achieved more? Would I be more successful? But then I think that maybe having to fight for everything made me stronger, more determined, more capable of facing problems and solving them alone. I don't know if I'm going to help my parents or not. I'll probably give them something eventually. Not because they deserve it or because I feel obligated, but because I don't want to be like them. I don't want to make decisions based on resentment or selfishness. But if I do, it'll be on my terms, with my conditions, and it definitely won't be the hundreds of thousands of dollars they gave my siblings over the years. It'll be something reasonable, something I can give without feeling like I'm betraying that one 9-year-old Jason, who worked double shifts while his siblings slept peacefully in apartments, paid for by mom and dad. Last week I ran into a cousin I hadn't seen in years by chance. He asked me about the family, and I told him in summary what had happened. He was quiet for a moment, and then told me, "You know, Jason, sometimes the best family is the one you build, not the one you got." And he's right. I've built a work team that's more loyal and supportive than my biological family ever was. I have friends who celebrate my successes without jealousy or comparisons. I have a life that's completely mine, built with my effort, without owing favors or explanations to anyone. I guess the story still isn't over, that eventually I'll have to make a final decision about my parents, about whether I try to rebuild something or if I just let things die naturally. For now, I'm fine in this limbo. Focused on my work, on my future, on the things I can control. I no longer carry that anger I felt before, that constant feeling of injustice that haunted me. I made my point. The numbers spoke for themselves, and everyone finally saw what I'd been, seeing my whole life. That's already something. That's already more than what I had 3 years ago when I left that house with my laptop under my arm and my heart full of resentment.